Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen. If you can see my screen, give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, so this webinar is being recorded. So for whatever reason, you need to hop off a little bit early or you missed different parts of it, it will be available for you all to view on the website after we are done. I'm multitasking here, letting folks into the meeting as we're getting started. Okay, I think that everyone is here. So welcome to the November Advisor webinar as we talk about your specific role in officer transition. So we know that November is the time in which our chapters are transition and our associate chapters are getting ready to end the semester. Right before Thanksgiving break, we have a flood of when officers are transitioning and getting ready to bring in the new leadership of the chapter. One of the things that I really enjoy about the officer transition piece is the opportunity to connect with the advisors that I get to work with specifically and just across the board as we think about the work that we do with the young men we have an opportunity to work with. So during this webinar, and I will say this interactive webinar because I definitely want you all to be included in the conversation as well, we'll share some models of advising that chapters are currently using. We'll discuss some best practices for officer transition that includes your role as advisors in that process. I'll provide some tips and resources for you to stay engaged with executive board members, especially during this virtual and hybrid operational time of the pandemic. And then also at the end, we'll have an opportunity for you all to participate and share some things that you are doing with your individual chapters that you have an opportunity to advise, and also open up the floor for question and answers. If there's anything that you want to talk about, or if you have a question as I'm going through the presentation, please go ahead and drop it in the chat box, and I will get to that as soon as we get to the end of the presentation. So I first want to talk a little bit about the advising models, and some of you on the call may be involved in each of these respective areas in some regard. So we have the one-on-one advising model, which a lot of the chapters that I have an opportunity to work with have this model instilled within their operation. This is when every executive board officer is ideally paired with one advisor, and then there's also one individual that's listed as a primary advisor. Usually when the chapters use this model, the advisors are paired with the individual executive board member. They may even have an opportunity to be in the field that the executive board members are in their leadership role. So for example, the vice president of finance might be paired with an advisor who is in the financial management industry. In addition to any other advisors that may be assuming professional roles that identify with the executive board positions. Recruitment is another one. In addition, there also might be an advisor that's just really genuinely interested in that particular executive board role and has volunteered to provide assistance to those men in those specific leadership positions. Then we have the primary / solo advising model where you have one advisor for the entire executive board. Chad, you hold that down really well and what it is that you do with the Lehigh chapter. And I'm sure that there's some on the webinar this afternoon that also hold that position of just being the primary and solo advisor that the chapter has. And then you have some chapters that have a team or a hybrid approach to their advising model. And while they may not have a one-to-one ratio with advisors to executive board members, there are a few, sometimes it's either 4 or 5 advisors that may make up a team of the advisory model approach to providing assistance and guidance to the young men who are in those respective leadership positions. The commonality between all of these specific advising models is that there is no success, and I'll stand to say that, and I stand on that all the time, but there's no success that chapters have if they do not have an active advisor that is really helping them navigate all the nuances as it relates to chapter operations. So I want to say that each and every one of you on the call this afternoon is vital to ensuring that the success of the officer transition experience is something that will still be held in a high regard to the chapter operations. I want to be able to go through a couple of the, what I would consider best practices as it relates to the role of the advisor in the transition process, and one that I really encourage all advisors to be a part of. The first is that while we're focusing on officer transitions, we're not just worried about those individuals that are incoming, but in order for a successful succession plan to be implemented, it's really important that we're focusing on both the outgoing and incoming executive board members. This provides an opportunity for continuity. It provides an opportunity for the outgoing officers to share any of their tips and advice that they are given to their successor as they transition out of the role. But I would say it's very important to focus on the two of those bodies coming together to determine how to best move forward. A couple of things that I recommend is that you host a meeting with both the outgoing and incoming officers to ensure that pertinent information is shared and updated. There's a lot of information that can be lost when our young men are transitioning and they forget to provide important information to those who are coming after them about how they need to operate, things that they need to be aware of. And we want to make sure that those who are coming into office are best positioned to be successful. So some of the important information that I would share with you all that's important for the young men to have at the forefront of their officer transition plan is to ensure that they have the officer update form, right? So when we, as the International Headquarters Liaison, sends out information every month, you all on the call should be receiving information from the liaisons to give you updates on what's happening on the International Headquarters front. Many times within that first couple of weeks or after that first month that they've transitioned, we're still sending information to the old executive board members because they have not completed the officer update form. And so that's one of the things that's important in how a lot of things gets lost is when we don't have our outgoing or sometimes our incoming officers to update that form directly after when elections take place. So I know that there's a couple of chapters that have already done elections and have filled out this form. Chad Lehigh has done that already. I know that there's a couple of other folks on the call who have had, elections already. So please just make sure that as you all are in communication with your outgoing executive board members that they complete that form. Or even if you want to direct the incoming executive board members, those who are newly elected to that form, we'll make sure that that information that we have is updated so that they get the important updates from the international office. CEP is another one that we want to make sure that is a part of the officer transition program. So December 30th is the deadline for when the CEP for the fall update forms are due. And one of the things that I encourage all of the outgoing executive board members of the chapters that I have an opportunity to work with is please ensure that the incoming executive board members are a part of that submission process. The reason is the outgoing officers are those individuals that have done the programming in the fall. They know what the chapter has done. They've been a part of those programs. And it's not fair to leave all of that information for the incoming executive board members to complete and to submit when some of them may not have been on the executive board prior to being elected for this new term. And some of them are brand new. So I always encourage the outgoing executive board officers to include the incoming executive board officers in that process. You also want to make sure that the outgoing executive board leaders has an opportunity to share where is the chapter when it comes to the Men of Merit standards. what has the chapter participated in, where do they stand in terms of the other metrics that they may need to attain in order to be successful with that program. So we want to make sure that that is continued part of communication that you all have as that meeting with the outgoing and incoming officers. And then lastly, any officer specific responsibilities that may relate to what we ask them to do on an international headquarters front, or what they might be asked to do on their individual campuses. Another thing with the outgoing and incoming executive board meeting is to review the past activities of the academic year or the semester and highlight what are the wins and opportunities for improvement that the men have really been having an opportunity to take part in. So what programs, opportunities worked really well? What are ways for us to enhance that experience for our chapter members and the community that we might be serving? And what are opportunities for improvement? So what did we learn from some things that we might have done this specific academic semester, and how can we improve for either future, whether it be the next semester or if it's a yearly activity or program that the chapter does every fall, that they have an opportunity to really spend some time dissecting what worked and what did not work. Another best practice is to set up time to meet with the incoming executive board collectively and individually based on positions. So this has an opportunity to create a lot of camaraderie with the incoming executive board together. You have an opportunity to identify some goals of the entire executive board for their term, and it's important that they set that together because they will be operating as a team and they need to know exactly where do we stand, how do we all stay on one accord, how do we keep the vision of how we want to operate as an executive board at the forefront and priority of our operations for the next year. I think it's also important to identify the goals of each individual executive board officer. And I have an opportunity to work with the Wichita chapter in doing this practice. They want every individual officer to have ownership over their specific role, but they also want them not only to grow in Delta Upsilon, they want them to also grow personally. So how can we best position our young men to identify some goals that would be beneficial for them as an executive board officer, and then having some time to talk about, now that you've thought about that, how does that translate to your experience as a young man navigating the college experience and even thereafter. And lastly, I would say a best practice when meeting with the incoming executive board is to create a calendar of chapter events and important dates for the entire year. We all know that our young men get very busy with their schedules, not only with classes and their Delta Upsilon expectations, but they're very involved on campus also. And so we want to make sure that we have those important dates for the entire year at the forefront of the operations and at the forefront of when the executive board meets, so that we are not missing deadlines, that we stay on top of the ability to actually execute the goals. And so when we talk about the year, one of the things that I have found to be helpful is to go semester by semester, identifying what those chapter programs or activities might be, assigning who is responsible for each of those activities based upon their individual leadership role, and then having a tracking system that allows for the executive board to pace and to see where do we stand as it relates to us being able to execute each and every one of these activities that we have on the calendar. It's also important to include all of Delta Upsilon International specific programs and dates. So if you haven't gotten it already, you should be receiving the November liaison update that includes information for upcoming programs in the spring, like President's Academy and the Regional Leadership Academy, all of which will be virtual this year, all of which will be at no cost to the chapters this year. So knowing when our dates are for the programs, knowing when rosters are due, knowing when membership fees are due, so that the men have that at the forefront, that it's not an afterthought. And that, quite frankly, they stay organized and on task, ready to adhere to what's necessary to keep the chapter successful. A couple of other things in terms of best practices. One of the things that I have found in working with the chapters that I am assigned is that for the first 2 months, they are very gung-ho on ensuring that they are successful in their individual roles. And when I have my one-on-one meetings with the chapter president and some of the other positional officers, we have an opportunity to track the progress on the goals that we talked about prior. So not only are we saying that these are best practices for you all as advisors, but I practice the same things that I'm sharing with you all on the slides, is that I have an opportunity to talk with each of the individual executive board members and the executive board collectively. What are the goals that you all have? And so when I'm touching base with them the first 2 or even 3 months to track progress, we have something to actually work from. So one of the things that I love to share with the executive board officers, and some of them will listen and some of them will not. There's always lessons learned through this process, but I always ask them to share what are some things that you all are doing in each executive board meeting to track your CEP. What are you doing to track your institutional responsibilities and goals, and how is that information kept up to date? In some meetings, I have the men they give me a whole list of how they're doing, and some of them are saying, yeah, we'll get to it, we'll get to it. But when we have the opportunity for advisors to be a part of the process, especially within those first 2 or 3 months, it provides an opportunity for the men to make it a practice. Every executive board meeting, we have time reserved to review where we stand with CEP. 10 to 15 minutes is what I share with all of the men that I have the pleasure of working with. I tell them, gentlemen, it does not take a lot of time. You do not have to spend an hour at each executive board meeting going over where you stand with CEP. But if you make it a practice to have this as a part of your process in your meeting for 15 minutes, I promise you, it will be much easier to go about submitting those requirements when the time comes. So that is a best practice that I would encourage you all to implement with your chapters if you're not already doing it. The last one, complete a mid-semester checkpoint and check-in. So just how the men have their midterms when it comes to their academic expectations and responsibilities, having a mid-semester checkpoint and check-in for the men to see where are we in terms of chapter programming, how are we doing with our Men of Merit standards requirements, how are we doing on campus, right? What is the reputation that the group has on campus? Who are you engaging with? Having an opportunity to have that checkpoint provides the men with that practice of always being in review, always having an opportunity to reflect on what work has been done prior to the point at which you're checking in. And I would say that reflection piece is really integral to a chapter's leadership being successful, is that as they are executing, they're also having an opportunity for a reflection. And that is what that mid-semester checkpoint and check-in is designed to do. Each of you on the webinar should know who your IHQ chapter liaison is. And if you do not know who that person is, at the end of this presentation, I do have my email. You can email me directly to find out who that individual is. But I would definitely encourage you all to build a relationship with this chapter liaison, with your chapter liaisons, not only to ensure that all of the information that the chapter needs to operate effectively is at their fingertips and that they have the data that they need, but it's also helping with a collaborative approach to servicing the chapters and their own unique needs. I enjoy the relationships that I have with my advisors of the chapters that I have an opportunity to work with. It is a partnership, it is a team effort. I know that I can count on this individual to help reinforce some messaging, and it always helps to just have that parental type of oversight, and even just relationship period of knowing that you have another individual that has the best interests of the chapter at heart, and that you can work collaboratively and collectively together to ensure their success. And then lastly, I would say that connecting with the campus fraternity and sorority advisor. So if you have an opportunity to have a phone conversation with this individual, if you happen to live close by and can stop in to say hello, pre-COVID, post-COVID, once we are given an opportunity to meet safely face to face. But I have found that advisors that are well informed of university and college operations have a very, very high success rate of ensuring that the chapter is successful, not only on campus, but also within the international headquarters structure. So if you have that opportunity to continue that relationship building and servicing the needs of the chapter with the campus fraternity and sorority advisor, I would encourage you all to do that. And some models may include a particular liaison that's similar to the IHQ structure, or you may have, just one sole person in the office that you might be able to connect with, but just so that they know that in addition to having the international headquarter liaison representative, that they also have an advisor who is also hands-on with the chapter, ensuring that they are successful. All right, so staying engaged. We all know from the roles that we have taken with advising the chapters from March of 2020 up until this point that we've all endured, some hardships and some challenges when it comes to engaging with the men and navigating what it means to be a virtual chapter and what does it mean to be hybrid, and how do you keep the men steered away from being apathetic to how things are moving along within the pandemic. We recognize that that is something that has been challenging to navigate through, and we definitely appreciate your grace and understanding as we too have navigated the exact same way when it comes to servicing our chapters. But some of the things that have worked for us, and I would encourage you all to do, and I'm sure that you probably have even been doing this prior to what we're navigating currently with the pandemic, is using technology to your advantage. So there are things that you can use, whether they be Zoom or Google Hangout or Google Classroom, Google Documents, in order to make sure that electronic record keeping and planning is at the forefront and priority of helping the men stay organized and engaged with each other. We have continued to do this as we service our chapters and we aren't able to visit in person. Zoom has been our best friend, to the point that we have numerous accounts and we have an opportunity to share lots of things with, the men that we work specifically with. Or for example, we had a Zoom meeting where we talked about campus and community engagement, where we were able to really talk about what are some of the things that we can navigate together when it comes to servicing the community. A lot of the men were very discouraged around the fact that they didn't have a lot of things that they could do within the community, but we found ways to tackle that. When it comes to electronic record keeping, I know that some of the chapters that I work with have been using Google Documents before we've had to navigate what this pandemic looks like. And they've kept Google folders, and they use this as a part of their transition and succession planning when it comes to transitioning and bringing on and onboarding, the incoming executive board leaders. There are a couple of Delta Upsilon educational programs that we have hosted for the positional officers, whether they be roundtables or educational content that will provide an opportunity for the men to stay engaged and also provide an opportunity for them to hear about the different challenges that their peers are facing and problem solve that together. And then lastly, future advisor webinars. So Michelle Marchand in our office is the Senior Director of Chapter Development, and she is the individual that organizes our future advisor webinars. So if there's anything that you all want to hear or talk about, please feel free to message her directly. Or you can send it to me and I can send that message along as well. As she was thinking about a topic for this month, I had at the forefront of my mind probably since August, really. What does it look like for us to successfully transition our chapters, and making sure that the advisors know that we can't do this work without their efforts, and this should be a team effort as we make sure that our men are able to be successful in their new roles. I want to have an opportunity for you all to ask any questions or share anything right now. So I will say, if you have anything that you would like to share, please go ahead and unmute yourself. That could be something that you all are doing individually or as a team of advisors to ensure the success of your chapter officers, but just want to open up the space for you all to be able to share with each other as well.
Hi, Veronica. This is Kevin Guinan from the Iowa State chapter. I had to actually step out there for 5 minutes to take a call, so I don't know if you've covered this or not, but one thing that we do with our chapter that works really well is at the beginning of each semester, we spend either between like 4 hours to 8 hours and get together for a day and bring in lunch and just have a planning session for the whole semester, set our goals, go over our CEP, set our schedule, do all that stuff, and it works really well. So I think that's if that's something other chapters can do, it works well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you may have been out when we covered that, but that was a part of making sure that, I'm not sure if you all do both with the outgoing and the incoming, of going over what worked well and what didn't work well, but definitely setting up some time with the incoming executive board members to go over their collective goals, individual goals, and then plan what that academic year is going to look like moving forward. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
Thanks, Veronica. We're, as you know, in a circumstance where the Greek system is shut down at Lehigh, and they've shut it down now for this spring semester as well. So it's been extraordinarily difficult to operate the chapter and try to do recruitment virtually, et cetera. So just wanted to thank you and your team for the support you've given us.
Sure, thank you so much, Chad. And I do want to say this, that I know that there are some chapters that, I believe there's some on the call that have done recruitment in the fall, and then there are some that are gearing up for recruitment in the spring semester as well. Hayden Ron on our staff has done a remarkable job of meeting with many of our chapters, if not all of them, to talk about what does it look like for us to navigate through what a virtual recruitment experience is. And we've seen a lot of our chapters be successful with his coaching and conversations. Many who were apprehensive before, but being able to have conversations around how do we navigate through this successfully, and how do we be nimble and recognize that this is new for all of us, but how do we overcome the challenges and still be able to move forward as a strong executive board and a chapter overall.
Veronica, hi, this is John Ziegler. I'm an advisor at Bucknell to the Officer for Loss Prevention.
Hi, John.
Hi there. And one of these challenges, one of the challenges that I think I've seen in my role with what was a colony, then working to become a chapter, and now a new chapter, is with that scheduling component. And I think what makes this even more challenging is just the unknowns of what, you know, in life right now you can or can't do. So even if you ideally trying to schedule a year or half a year out, to even put on paper what that might look like as far as what kind of events you could do or can't do is very challenging. And I don't know if there's an answer to this, but I guess I'm just reaching out to others as well, as how, as an advisor, you know, to recommend what they should really put out there on paper for what this spring might look like, when, you know, some of the chapters won't even know to what extent they'll be there or remote or both, or those kind of situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely understand that, John. We had a couple of sessions before about what does it mean to engage brothers virtually. I can send you that presentation. We went over a couple of ideas that the men are able to do some of which they're already doing because they are hanging out virtually. Some of them may be living together, but there are a lot of different things that they can focus on at the moment, especially with restrictions of gathering, that they can focus on building brotherhood, because the reality is that if that is not an integral component of how they're operating and engaging with each other now, when we come out of this, that's going to be an issue of how do we engage the members, because now they're totally disengaged. So one of the things that we've been really sharing, and I've been personally sharing with the men that I work with, is yes, you cannot at the moment go out into the community the way that you want to. And yes, your philanthropy that you're used to having in a huge auditorium with many different guests can't happen the way that it usually does. Is there an opportunity for you to navigate that in a virtual space? Is it okay for you to postpone it for right now with the unknown and not put the pressure on yourself to have to perform during these times when it's unprecedented and we don't know, right? Like, we don't know what even the spring semester may hold. And so I've really encouraged the men to focus on how do you continue to build those relationships with each other? What can you do with each other to build that belonging, and making sure that at a time like this, some of the men really need those connections with the men that they build friendships with. And we can't put that to the wayside because we can't do those programs that we might be used to doing. So I would encourage you to continue to focus on that, to think about, are there opportunities for us to transition from in-person to virtual, and definitely to speak with your liaison. I think your liaison is Nicole. Is Nicole?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
To really spend some time thinking with her, how do we make this work? Knowing that she understands the environment at Bucknell, she understands the community, what's around the campus, what's in the community, how can they best navigate, but really focusing on that internal brotherhood. I believe, and I always say this with the staff, is that if we don't have that interpersonal connection piece, then we're going to be left with really an even bigger problem, because the men they won't know even how to interact with each other. I'm not sure if anybody else has anything else to share in that regard, but it's a very it's a reality that we have to navigate.
Thank you, Veronica.
You're welcome.
Veronica, what was the name of the guy at headquarters that's provide recruitment support?
His name is Hayden Rahn, RAHN at deltau.org.
So just at deltau.org.
Yes, I'll connect you in an email right after this chat. Is there anything else that folks want to share or have questions about? I'm going to stop I can't see. Here's my contact information, more at deltau.org. If you have any questions around your liaison, or just any questions in general. I work specifically on our educational programs and organizing and executing that. I'm going to stop sharing here so that I can see if any questions are in the chat. There's no questions in the chat. Would anyone else who's on the call as an advisor like to share something that has worked for them, for you all, with all the other participants? See a couple familiar names. Don't be shy. Dave, if you're speaking, I can't hear you.
Dave, you're muted.
Oh, I think he's on a call. Would anyone else like to share anything? If not, then we can go ahead and wrap up this session.
Thanks very much, Veronica.
Okay. Thank you all so much. As I said before, this will be available on the website shortly after the presentation this afternoon. And if you have any questions or need any information in regards to any upcoming programs, you can definitely send those my way as it relates to President's Academy and Regional Leadership Academy, or anything in general. You can feel free to reach out to your specific International Headquarters Chapter Liaison. You all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Veronica.
Thanks, Veronica.
Okay.
You're welcome.